The picks are in, the free agents have been signed, the NFL offseason is effectively over. The teams have been built up, and now it's time to go through training camp, get ready, and play the season. Today, we are going to be doing a post-draft, post-free agency NFL Top 10, discussing the best and brightest teams around the league. And we may be talking about the Dallas Cowboys. They just went out and traded for George Pickens, swapped a third rounder for him. That will dynamically change their offense. Wait and see if we mention them, if they cracked our top 10 later in the video. But starting things off, I've got the San Francisco 49ers, the much maligned San Francisco 49ers. And when you look at teams who had everything go wrong for them in 2024, the 49ers is the team you point to. Every offensive star got injured. CMC barely played. Brock Purdy playing through injury. Ayuk gone for the year. Deebo Samuel banged up. Kittle injured. Trent Williams, their most important offensive player, gone. It was a real mess. And they got raided in free agency. Lost Charvarius Ward. Lost Dre Greenlaw. Lost Aaron Banks. Not that big of a loss. Lost Afunga. All those guys are playing on different teams now. I don't think that really matters all that much. A lot of those guys I just named didn't play a full season. A lot of them didn't play 10 games in 2024. I don't think their loss is going to be that significant. What's going to be significant is getting the guys back healthy they need to. Getting back the Trent Williams, getting back Christian McCaffrey for an entire year, presumably. Right now, his medicals do look good, and having Brock Purdy not dealing with that nagging shoulder injury. I think their offense is still going to be elite in 2025. I think they've got Fred Warner. I think they've got Nick Bosa, and if they can stay on the field, that defense should take a big step forward, particularly with some of the draft picks they made. I liked the Mykel Williams pick. I think that's the best Georgia player available, certainly the best day one Georgia player available. He will immediately contribute to the pass rush. Alfred Collins out of Texas, big man on the inside, gives them pass rush upside, gives them a solid run stopper. I think those are all great draft picks to help an area of need. So I think the 49ers cracked this top 10 for me. I could see why you wouldn't have them on here. If you think some team, the AFC is better, if you think the injury concerns are just too great, whatever. But I still have some faith in the 49ers. This is the final year of their window for me.
I can't really put the 49ers in my top 10 because they not only have lost a lot of pieces, but they are now incredibly young on the defensive side of the ball. How exactly will each draft pick pan out? Will they all hit immediately week one and be great players? It doesn't feel like Mykel Williams, you mentioned the defensive tackle from Texas that they drafted. I don't know if they'll be superstars day one to replace the pieces that they lost. So I don't think that's a guarantee to where I think their defense is going to be phenomenal immediately. You mentioned some of the injury concerns. I'm not exactly willing to mark it down as a shoe-in that Christian McCaffrey, coming off of the Achilles tendonitis he dealt with at the beginning of last season, the knee injury he had later in the season, is going to be the same old Christian McCaffrey heading into this year. Brock Purdy still behind a not great offensive line, and Brandon Ayuk is coming off of that torn ACL. How good will he be at the start of the season? So I think there are too many question marks to say the 49ers are a top 10 team. Do I think they'll be a good team? Yes. But I also think they're the second best team in the AFC West, which I think you also probably agree with, which we'll get to later. So
I'll jump in and say the AFC West is tight enough.
NFC West, sorry, I said
where
AFC
conceivably
West.
One game here and there could make a difference. I could see them winning that division. Look how close the Rams and the Seahawks were last year. Both those teams win 10-7. Seahawks lost the tiebreaker, missed the playoffs entirely. So the division's tight. I don't think the Bear team is necessarily going to win that division, but you look around the league, the teams doing the best defensively, the Eagles, you point them, they are built around young defenses because they draft young defensive players, because they draft really well. 49ers front office generally drafts well, so I got no reason to not have faith in them. The young defensive formula is what a lot of the great teams are doing. So the young guys on defense, I don't see that being that big of an issue. If they're young guys on offense, bigger problem, but...
Well, the Eagles have also had the luxury of having some veterans each year for the young guys to sit behind and not have a full snap count and have the weight of the playing time fall on the front seven.
Hey, trial by fire, but we do not need to get into the Eagles now. I am sure they will come up later in the video. Who's your number two?
Well, I think it's important to note, whether it's the 49ers or any of these teams after the draft, that irrespective of how excited you are about your team's draft class, it is impossible to know if these players will pan out. Because there are often times where we see draft classes where everyone is super excited, they get high grades, wide praise. I mean, the Giants a few years ago when they got Evan Neal, a lot of people's highest graded tackle, they got Kayvon Thibodeau, widely graded as the second best edge in the class. And it turns out Evan Neal sucks. Kayvon Thibodeau, very mid. So, and then with the Rams, their franchise was in a roundabout way sort of saved by hitting on Puka Nacua in the 5th round, who really helped keep that offense elite. So I think it is impossible to know some of these later round picks, how good they'll be. Will these early round picks truly turn out? But I say all that to say,
to sit firmly on the fence. Well, maybe these teams are going to be good.
There is a little bit of fence sitting there, but at number 10, I have the Cincinnati Bengals, and this is me just being optimistic. Their offense, once they got it figured out last year, was truly elite, and they just have too much offensive talent to not be a top team in the NFL. I understand how bad their defense was last year, but the reason I'm sliding them into their top 10 is because their process with the players they picked addressed exactly what they needed. They got Shamar Stewart, a wildly talented, athletic edge player who can defend the run very well. Hopefully he's able to reach that pass rush upside. And then they got Demetrius Knight in the 2nd round, who played a lot of football in college, is an athletic linebacker who can help out their defense. So I'm choosing to believe that these talented players they drafted on the defensive side of the ball will help their defense immediately. They got a guard in the 3rd round who maybe he develops into a starter for Joe Burrow. That will be nice. But my one caveat will be...
I think someone just told me you shouldn't rely on these young, talented defensive players to come in and immediately have a high snap count. I just heard that somewhere.
I think that is a little bit different because we're looking at a 49ers defense that had a lot of veterans and has relied on veterans for so long, and then you're having young defensive players come in, whereas the Bengals, they've been really bad, and at this point, you're just trying to get to average to mid in order to support your elite offense.
So you're having young players go to a good coaching staff versus young players going to a bad coaching staff is what you're saying.
It's a new coaching staff.
I have very little faith in the Bengals. I kind of think they're going to be in the same 9-8, 10-7 territory. They're just going to get rated again and again defensively.
With that being said, I'd kick them right back out of the top 10 if they actually go ahead and trade Trey Hendrickson and go ahead and trade Jermaine Pratt, because it's been rumored that they drafted Demetrius Knight and drafted Shamar Stewart just to fill those needs so they don't have to go ahead and pay Trey Hendrickson or Pratt.
Yeah, if they give their 2 best defensive players the boot, they're going to be Carolina Panthers 2024 defense levels of terrible. It's not going to be special, but I don't think they belong on the list. You don't think the 49ers belong on the list. At number 9, I've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they really didn't lose all that much in free agency. They lost their center, lost Chris Godwin, who may be coming back, but is definitely not going to be the same. It's probably going to miss the start of the year. Still on the team, technically. But you look what they got back. Emeka
They didn't
Egbuka.
lose Chris Godwin. They signed him to an extension.
I know, but he's not playing, and he's not going to be the same player given the injury. Like, they've lost Chris Godwin. They've got a guy named Chris Godwin who's a wide receiver on their roster, if you follow me.
Okay.
That is a hater way of looking at things, but I'm skeptical if he can bounce back. But they got Hassan Reddick, they got Emeka Egbuka, and they got Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, where I was a very big fan of that pick. This defense could just pound you to dirt with how strong their interior defensive line is. They can just flatten any guard, any center in the NFL. They can stop the tush push. With their offense, with their refounded running game behind Bucky Irving, with their solid offensive line with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Egbuka, Ryan Miller, a bunch of those guys. This offense can score a lot of points. The defense can shut down a lot of offense. They're just a nice all-around team. They're not truly elite in any one area besides that interior defensive line, but they can handle things. They're well coached. I got a lot of faith they're going to win the NFC South once again, win 10 to 11 games, and be in the thorn in the side of the top dogs in the NFC. Maybe beat the Lions, beat the Vikings, beat the Eagles in the regular season or in the playoffs because of how well they can shut down the run. So they're a tough team to place. I don't think you can be too high on them given the limitations they have at quarterback, but still a very solid squad.
A little Baker hate there. Did not expect that.
He's not one of those guys. He's not a Jalen Hurts. He's not a Joe Burrow. He's not a Josh Allen.
Well, the Buccaneers are a very good team. I don't have them in my top 10, but a lot of the things you named, very solid on defense. They have a lot of solid players on offense. Not overly super elite at any position on the field, but they're very good pretty much everywhere. I just cannot slide them into the top 10. I like the high-end upside of the teams I have in the top 10. I think maybe I'm even knocking them down a little bit in my mind because they play in the NFC South and I don't view their competition as good, even though they'll be a shoe-in to win that division. So maybe that is jading my perspective on how good they are a little bit, but I'd have them on the outside.
Michael Penix MVP season.
I don't see that happening, but I have them right on the outside of the top 10 looking in. At number 9, I have Isaiah's Vikings, and it would have been nice to see them pick up a high-end safety in the draft to pair next to Harrison Smith, who's going on year 14, maybe add a member to that secondary. But when you just look at how they have built that offense to support J.J. McCarthy, there is a lot to get excited about. They spent a lot of money on a center, on a guard. They drafted a guard in the first round. They have 2 very high-end quality starting offensive tackles, and then you have the best receiver in the NFL, one of the best wide receiver 2s in the NFL in Jordan Addison, add a speedy receiver later in the draft this past year. Maybe he's able to... Who's
Jalen Nailor right now is their wide receiver 3.
Maybe he eclipses Jalen Nailor. They have a good backfield. So when you look at all the talent they have on offense, Brian Flores, what that defense accomplished last year, some of the pieces they added in free agency, the talent is through the roof. Top 5 team in the NFL. The only thing bumping me down to 9 is we have J.J. McCarthy in his first year, going to be the youngest quarterback in the NFL. We just don't know what we're going to get from him yet. And maybe that you're going to hate on that because you're a Vikings fan and that's me being pessimistic, but I think it's also me being realistic and also optimistic that he can capitalize somewhat on all of the talent they have.
I don't care if you're at a pure neutral J.J. McCarthy. I take issue with people saying, oh, he's going to be a clear downgrade over Sam Darnold, because those people clearly just looked at the record, looked at the stats, and did not watch what Sam Darnold did on the field. Very good quarterback, very limited quarterback. I'll talk about them later. At number 8, I got the Washington Commanders, and they did something very important this offseason. They got their tackles sorted out. I don't like Laramie Tunsil as much as most people do. I think he's kind of riding on name value. Still a very good pass blocker. I wasn't a huge Josh Connerly guy, but I can acknowledge the talent, the physical traits. He will be a very good right tackle, and they've given Jaden Daniels some protection. Did they lose a few pieces on defense? Jeremy Chin, Dante Fowler, Jonathan Allen? Yes. But they have secure protection for their quarterback going into year 2. The reason I've got them at 8 is their interior offensive line, not that great. Their defensive line got worse in the offseason. I'm not that big of a fan of the running backs after Brian Robinson, who has been dealing with injury. And outside of Terry McLaurin, wide receiver core is suspect. I think a really good pass rush could disrupt this team, will beat them like they were beaten in the playoffs by the Philadelphia Eagles. And to be blunt, I know they went to the NFC Championship game. If the Lions had been healthy, they would have beaten this team. So I've got them at 8. There are a few teams in the NFC I've got over them, but still a very good squad. If they went back to the NFC Championship game, I'd be shocked, but I wouldn't be overwhelmingly shocked.
Yeah, I bumped them down a few spots from our rankings that we had immediately post free agency, just because when I take a look at the team, I don't think they have quite as much depth as some of the other teams I have ranked above them. Yes, it is very nice that they went out and got Laramie Tunsil, a bookend left tackle, hopefully for Jaden Daniels. They drafted Connerly to play that other offensive tackle. You would hope the offensive line is going to be better, but like Isaiah said, Brian Robinson, he's a very solid player, but when he's not on the field, their run game seems to struggle, and behind him they have some older players. So I think they're not quite as deep as some of the other high-end teams in the NFL. I think they definitely overachieved relative to the totality of talent in the roster getting to the conference championship game last year. Is Jaden Daniels phenomenal? Yes. Do they have a very good roster that could potentially compete for a Super Bowl? I think so, but if we're ranking the top 10 teams right now, I think they're are just a few little question marks where you maybe slide them down at 8, where I also have them, rather than being at 5 or in the top 5.
Having them at 8 is not really a testament to them being bad. It's just they're not one of those super teams, those hyper-talented rosters, or those teams with a top 3 quarterback who is a threat to win MVP any given year. Jaden Daniels needs to take that next step. He needs to perform like he did in the playoffs every single game in order for us to put him in that category. At number 7, a massive drop-off from where I had them post-free agency, I have the Detroit Lions. And I've moved them down 5 spots. I had them at 2. I've got them at 7 now because I've reflected a little bit more about the loss of their coordinators. Ben Johnson is going to be a big loss. Yes, getting Jared Goff where he needs to be mentally isn't suddenly going to be undone by Johnson going to the Bears. But he is not going to progress anymore, and the last time we saw Jared Goff, he did not look good. He's going to stagnate a little bit. The roster, offensively, their O-line got worse. Kevin Zeitler was a very good guard who is now playing in Tennessee. I know they got Tate Radledge and Miles Frazier in the draft. Odds are neither of those two guys are going to be able to step in and replicate Zeitler's production day one. So downgraded a little bit offensively. Defensively, they are going to be getting players back, yes. But Aaron Glenn may have been the most underrated defensive coach in all football. Lions fans gave him a lot of flack for how their season ended, giving up a ton of points to the Commanders, even though Jared Goff was slinging the ball to Washington's defense over and over again. What he was able to do with the limited talent available to him is a testament to the phenomenal coach he was. Great blitz packages, great coverage packages, had guys exactly where they needed to be to disrupt routes, had the timing of opposing quarterbacks completely shaken. He is a great defensive mind. It may have been a bigger loss than Ben Johnson for the Lions. I think they're going to be worse than they were win total-wise. I mean, no duh, they won 15 games. They're not winning 15 games again in 2025. And I really did not like the first-round pick, Thicc Williams. That was a clear reach for a need when you already have DJ Reader on your roster. That move was made for the benefit of the Lions team in 2026 and 2027 when DJ Reader is gone. That does nothing for them right now.
I don't really necessarily agree with the Thicc Williams in the long-term future. That's directly what they were looking at. I think they looked at where they've maybe been weak in the past. It has been their defensive line, the inability to stop the run. And with Thicc Williams, it is kind of maybe replicating how successful the Eagles were last year by having a plethora of talent that can rotate through that front seven to keep them fresh. Thicc Williams, a big nose tackle who offers some pass rush upside, had 5.5 sacks last year at Ohio State, was good at stopping the run, 6'3", 330 pounds. So I think there's a lot for him to offer when it comes to where they selected him. After he was picked, we saw a whole lot of nose tackles go in the second round or defensive tackles go in the second round. So it was a very popular position that there was a run on. So I think that needs to be put in the context of that. I liked the fact that they filled that need. I have them a little bit higher. I don't think I have them quite as high as Lions fans would rank their team because I do still agree with the question marks you noted about the coordinators they lost. But I had them around where you have them now after free agency, but I do have them bumped up a few spots.
The Lions were getting gouged on outside zone and in large part on quarterback runs by guys like Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels in their losses to the Bills and the Commanders. Thicc Williams isn't doing all that much for that. If you're going to stick him in at nose tackle, great. He's not making his way out past the tackles to make dynamic, show-stopping tackles on running backs or quarterbacks in space. And I don't really think it's addressing a need if it's going to be a depth piece day one. But I'm not that high on the Lions draft. Tesla will be good, sure, but he's a slot player you're going to have to teach to play a different position because Amon-Ra St. Brown is their slot guy. So I don't know, physically gifted, I'm sure it'll work out. But first-year offensive coordinator, first-year defensive coordinator, substandard first-round pick, and the exodus of the brain drain. I'm not that high on them anymore. They're not the best team in their division anymore to me.
I'll get to the rest of my thoughts on the Lions when I get to them in my rankings. At number 7, I have the Rams, and the Rams are just very good. When you have Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, those are too many smart, talented players and coaches to not have a top 5 offense in the NFL, especially when you look at their backfield and they have Kyron Williams. Maybe they'll use Blake Corum a little bit more this year. And they have the running back out of Auburn who they just drafted in the 4th round, who his name is escaping me currently. I wonder also what that means for Blake Corum. That is yet to be determined.
It means another 50 carries for Ron Riverside. That's what that means.
Potentially. But they just have Devontae Adams is that elite outside receiver. Puka Nacua, and maybe that allows him to do more of that gimmicky stuff that he's very good at while also doing all the number 1 wide receiver stuff. I just think the pairing of Nacua, Devontae Adams, all the young talent they have on defense is excellent. If they hit on that Terrence Ferguson pick at tight end, 6'5", 255 in any way, and he can be a productive pass catcher for them, that's another big plus add to that offense that they haven't really had over the last couple years. So I think the Rams are the best team in the NFC West.
I can't imagine putting the Rams below the Lions. If they were to play each other in the playoffs with the current rosters, and maybe say they get worn down by age and injuries as the season goes on, whatever. I can't imagine the Rams losing to the Lions in the playoff game with their current roster. Shipping off an old Cooper Kupp and replacing him with Devonta Adams, who admittedly did benefit from playing buddy ball with Aaron Rodgers towards the back half of 2024. Still, probably top 3 wide receiver 2 in the NFL. Very solid running game. Elite, top of the league front 7. I'll talk about them a little bit in a second. I just can't imagine the Lions beating that team. But as promised, at 6, I've got the Minnesota Vikings. I'll address the losses first. They lost Cam Bynum, who was a pretty big subtraction in the secondary. They need to either build from within or Isaiah Rodgers needs to hit big time to replace him. They lost Sam Darnold and they lost Pat Jones. Pat Jones was a rotational piece who frankly needed to go despite his 7 sacks because Dallas Turner has to have those snaps going into year 2. And Darnold is an incredibly physically talented player, can run better than a lot of people think, has a cannon arm, could not throw over the middle, could not throw slant passes, did not have a ton of touch, and his processing speed, it was slow. It got better compared to his time on the Jets, but it was still just slow. For what KOC wants to do, you have to be able to throw over the middle. You have to be able to throw slants. You have to be able to hit screens accurately. You have to be able to get the ball in the playmakers' hands so they can make the plays. Jordan Aston and Justin Jefferson were not utilized to the full extent of their abilities in 2024. McCarthy, say whatever you want about the arm talent, the physical traits, the injuries. He was the best quarterback in college football the year he came out at throwing over the middle of the field. Highest completion percentage in that category by a wide margin with pretty substandard receiving talents compared to the guys like Caleb Williams and Drake May. Also a very good quarterback on third down. And you already talked about completely overall in the offensive line, Will Fries, Donovan Jackson, Ryan Kelly replacing an area of weakness, really the area of weakness outside of Sam Darnold, why they lost the Lions, why they lost the Rams in the playoffs. This is a completely different team. It's the best offensive supporting cast in football outside of maybe the Eagles. And it's one of the best offensive minds in football, channeled through a rookie quarterback. They're also getting Mekhi Blackman back, who tore his ACL in training camp prior to the season starting. I think that is an underrated piece. They're going to have him, who was basically a free agency signing from what they had last year. I'm very happy with where the Vikings are at. Top 5 offensive mind of the coaching staff, top 5 defensive mind of the coaching staff. I'm amazed Flores didn't get a job somewhere. And the future is only getting brighter. If they play the Lions twice in the back half of 2025 like they did in 2024, they will beat them at least once and probably twice. They have to play in the first half of the year when JJ's still trying to get his steps. Yeah, I can see the Lions sweeping him, but they're the better team. They're the better offense. They're more talented. They've got better coaches. They've got a better quarterback. So I'm going with the Lions just behind the Minnesota Vikings.
I understand the vision for the Vikings and the long-term, extremely bright future that fans almost certainly see. I just can't put them that high in the top 10 yet because you have a 22-year-old quarterback who's going to be the youngest quarterback in the NFL, playing for the first time. There are going to be hills and there are going to be valleys. There's going to be a learning process, even playing in this extremely talented offense, where some of these more veteran teams that you've heard me name above them, they're not going to have some of those same issues early. So I see it. I have them in my top 10. I think they're wildly talented, but it's more of a wait and see with me for J.J. McCarthy.
Those hills and valleys have to come at the right time because you look at 2024 again. Sam Darnold played terrible against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he played terrible against the Tennessee Titans. Minnesota won both those games because their defense and the rest of their offensive skill players stepped up. If those valleys come at the right time, they can mitigate some of the rookie quarterback struggles. If JJ has a bad game against the Lions, they're probably not beating the Lions. If he has a bad game against pretty much anyone else in their schedule, they stand a good shot. The roster's that good.
At number 6, I have the Los Angeles Chargers, and I think they are going to be extremely good. Their roster is undoubtedly better than it was last year, where we saw them kind of overachieve relative to what we thought they would be with the perceived lack of talent and some of the turnover we saw happen with Jim Harbaugh coming into the building. Now you take a look at their backfield. They had J.K. Dobbins, an often injured running back last year, Gus Edwards as running back number 2. Immediately they get Amarian Hampton in the first round, who's a true 4-down back with elite speed, pass catching ability. I think that is a great addition for the Jim Harbaugh offense. You have Najee Harris as running back number 2. Backfield immediately better. You look at the receiver room. They added Trey Harris in the second round. Hopefully he can be that Wide receiver 2, Talad McConkey, and Quentin Johnson can be a comfortable wide receiver 3. So they definitely don't have anything close to one of the high-end wide receiver rooms in the NFL, but I trust Jim Harbaugh, the talent evaluator, and this has been thrown out there in the media, but especially with these most recent draft classes, maybe even next year, Jim Harbaugh recruited all these guys when he was at Michigan, or had some knowledge of them when he was at Michigan recruiting players. So I trust Jim Harbaugh, the talent evaluator. Over the course of his career, he's proved to be one of the best roster builders in college football, in the NFL, and I just love the direction they went with their draft picks, and I think their roster is better than last year, so I think they're going to be a top 10 team.
I don't think the roster's better at all. I mean, you look at who they lost in free agency. Poona Ford is now playing for the other team in LA. That's a really big loss. He was a phenomenal interior defensive lineman for the Chargers. They lost Joey Bosa. Maybe say, okay, he wasn't on the field with injury. When he was there, he was still a clear plus player. So their D-line got worse. They didn't do a ton to address the defense in free agency, in my opinion. The interior of their offensive line, outside of Mekhi Becton, who presumably will play right guard, is still an absolute mess. Their guard and center on the left side are not good. Like, they do not have NFL-level guys at that position, so that limits what they can do in the run game. And acting like Amari and Hampton is immediately going to be an upgrade over J.K. Dobbins, maybe he'll be an upgrade over what Dobbins was in the second half of the year after he had missed a little bit of time with injury. Still at over 1,000 yards from scrimmage, still incredibly productive in the first half of the year. So if he can get to that level, I don't know. Maybe he's similar level. I don't know if he's an immediate upgrade. Obviously an upgrade at RB2 with Najee Harris. He's better than Gus Edwards. But I don't know. I think Trey Harris and Quentin Johnson play a similar role. They're going to eat into each other's touches if it comes down to it. I don't think this roster is all that much better. And you look at the teams I named earlier on this list, the 49ers pass rush, the Buccaneers pass rush, the Commanders, I think the Commanders are just a better team, the Vikings pass rush, they will just shred this Chargers team if push comes to shove with how bad the interior offensive line still is. We saw it in the playoffs. I got limited faith in LA in the big leverage moments because the O-line and because Herbert. So I could have them as an honorable mention, sure, but I just don't think they're worthy of being in the top 10. I need to see it.
I've seen Harbaugh time and time again overachieve relative to the public and the media and general consensus opinion of the talent he's had on his rosters.
He got a helmet on, he lining up in the B gap. Is he replacing Poona Ford? Has he been eating good this offseason? Has the steak and milk finally circulated into his system and got him up over 350?
I am optimistic when it comes to the players the Chargers have drafted. I just think they have a better offensive roster for sure than they did last year.
Putting a lot of faith in Trey Harris. They're also in the AFC West. That division is going to cannibalize itself. Obviously, we've got the Chiefs, who we're going to talk about a little bit later on here. Broncos should conceivably be better. Raiders should be a lot better. You look at
Raiders probably should be a lot better, but
it's the Raiders. We shall wait and see on them. But that division is going to cannibalize itself a little bit. When you look at how tight the playoff race was, I could definitely see LA missing out on the playoffs or having to get that 7 spot and going on the road to the 2 seed and immediately just getting smacked. Be a fine team, sure, but I think the NFC in general is just a way better conference, as you maybe can tell from these picks. I got 7 NFC teams on this list. And while a team like LA, while a team like the Bengals, who I've left off, could make the playoffs, I just don't think they compare to the NFC counterparts from a roster standpoint. They're getting by on high-end QB talent. Anyway, at my number 5, as previously alluded to, I got the other team in Los Angeles, the Rams. And losing Cooper Kupp, it kind of hurts. Him and Stafford had that connection. Losing Jonah Jackson, it kind of hurts. I don't think he's that good of a guard, but he's definitely going to make the Bears better. And losing Bobby Brown just flat out hurts. He's a very solid piece on the defensive line. He's going to make Carolina better. He's going to be part of their defensive resurgence. But they got Devonta Adams. They got Poona Ford. They got Coleman Shelton, who's a very good center who had a limited role. And they got Josiah Stewart, who can be a phenomenal rotational pass rusher. Pair that with a top 3 front 7 in football, an offensive line on the rise, and a Matthew Stafford who is all in and getting coached by one of the 3 best offensive minds in football. And yeah, this team's going to be really good. They were the only team to give the Eagles a run for their money in the playoffs last year, and they clearly got better in the offseason. So I got them at number 5 based off that. I think if I had to make a bet right now and couldn't pick the reigning Super Bowl champion to represent the conference, I would pick the Rams to come out of the NFC. They are that good to me. This is the final few years of them being that good, but it's now or never. The window is open and they are sprinting through it.
We largely agree on the Rams. I basically agree with everything you said about them. I just have them a few spots lower. I think with the Rams and above, a lot of these teams, they're going to be in the contending for a Super Bowl conversation. The only reason I had them a few spots lower is maybe they don't quite have as much roster depth as the teams I have ranked above them. But when you have Sean McVay, you have Stafford, you have that receiver room, you have the running back room that they have now pretty deep at running back, and you have the young, talented defensive players that you hopefully take the next step, they're going to be extremely good. We both agree the best team in the NFC West.
I'm going to push back on you again and say there's no way you can imagine the Chargers with their offensive line beating this Rams team if they were to play each other. I don't get the justification of having them over them. You say, oh, maybe they don't have the depth. They have the depth in the front seven. They have the depth where you want the depth to be. Their defensive line is deep. They could rotate guys thanks to what they did in free agency in the draft. This is a really good team, man. I can't imagine, what's the process of LA beating this team? Grinding it to dust by running it up the middle. Can't run it up the middle on them. Can't have Herbert drop back to pass for that long because the pass rush is going to tear them apart like they tore the Vikings apart.
Amarian Hampton, 25 carries. Lad McConkey, 10 catches, and they win 17-14.
Yeah, Amarian Hampton, 25 carries, 62 yards. Good luck with that, Tex.
Jim Harbaugh optimism. I thought you'd understand being a Michigan guy.
Yeah, I'm also realistic. I was there for the entirety of the Jim Harbaugh process. I was there for the Joe Milton year. I know what bad Jim Harbaugh teams look like. It's not a bad Jim Harbaugh team in LA right now, but it's not the Jim Harbaugh team.
At number 5, I have the Lions, which is definitely lower than their fan base would rank them. I'd imagine their fan base probably thinks they're going to be the best team in the NFL with how rabid they could be. And it is surprisingly, coming into this conversation, higher than Isaiah is ranking the Lions. But the reason I have them at 5 is because I like their draft. I like that they added depth to their defensive line. Tyreek Williams, who can be an immediate day one contributor. They're not really weak anywhere across their entire roster. And Tate Ratledge, you mentioned they lost a guard. He can slot in immediately. He had 37 starts at Georgia. So I also think that was a good pick to fill a position of need. So I like what they did in the draft. You also mentioned Tesla adds a 4-3 receiver to their wide receiver room. We'll see what he can do eventually. He's not a shoo-in to be a high-end producer right away.
4-4.
I think it was 4-3-7.
It was a high 4-4. I'll check, but
Sure.
4-4-3.
4-4-3? Never mind.
Shut up!
4-4-3. He's a speedy receiver regardless. He's also 6'4", so he's got a big frame. I think he has some potential there. Will he play an immediate role right away? Probably not, given the running backs they have in their backfield. Amon-Ra St. Brown. You have Sam Laporta. So that's a wait and see. But the reason I am probably not as optimistic as Lions fans is we don't know what's going on with their coordinators. I'm going to hope they're going to at least be solid, and that's why I still have them at 5 rather than falling all the way down where Isaiah has
them. Their secondary is not that great outside of Brian Branch. I mean, DJ Reed's a fine guy, sure, but he's going to have to be their cornerback one. And if you line DJ Reed up on Justin Jefferson for a long period of time, or really DJ Moore, any of the other top guys in the AFC North, they're going to get absolutely barbecued. Terrion Arnold was not good in 2024. Their second rounder, whose name's eluding me right now, was not good in 2024. So the cornerback room is not great. So they do have some areas of weakness. They're not a perfect roster. They also kind of suffer from being, they've got a super team, but they've got also like a top 9 to 12 quarterback. They don't have one of the guys. And having a top 9 to 12 quarterback is fine if he can maintain his level of play or step up in the playoffs. But as we've seen, Jared Goff just cannot do that. Even on the Super Bowl run for the Rams, he did not elevate his play. And last year, oy vey, that was a disastrous end of the year. Moving on to number 4, though, and this is where we're going to really start to agree. I got the Kansas City Chiefs. Yes, they lost Joe Thuney. Yes, they lost D-Hop. Yada, yada, yada. Derek Nottie, bigger loss than some people are giving it credit for. Still very good at wide receiver, presuming Rashee Rice comes back and is close to where he was. Running back depth should be all right. Losing Samaj isn't great, but Pacheco should be a bit better with a repaired ankle. Replaced their depth on the offensive, or their pieces on the left side of the offensive line with Josh Simmons, with Jalen Moore. Austin Gillette out of Louisville is a really solid defensive tackle. And right now, the enemy of the Chiefs is father time and its injuries. They can get to the playoffs healthy with their wide receiver room and tight end room intact. They're going to go on yet another run. Their defense is still great, still deep. And the only reason I've got them all the way down at 4 is because, frankly, Bills were a better team than them and lost them in the playoffs last year. I think the Ravens have done enough to leapfrog them, in my opinion. And of course, there's number one, who you know it is.
Well, I don't agree that the Bills were a better team than them last year, but what I will agree with, because I have the Chiefs at 4, is that the Bills, I think, addressed some of their needs in a bigger way that I'm more confident in than what the Chiefs have done. And there are a few smaller or bigger question marks with the Chiefs when it comes to projecting them next year than I think with these top 3 teams I have ranked above them. I think with any of the 4 teams we just named, I think these are the true top 4 big dogs, and then there's a gap between them and the other 6 teams we've named, or any of the other teams you might be thinking
I don't know.
about.
I could see the Rams beating the Chiefs. Stafford's got that playoff gene. He rises to the occasion, and their front seven is really good and could conceivably do what the Eagles did to that Chiefs O-line. So, I don't know.
Any given Sunday, but if we're ranking teams after the draft, I do think there's a gap there. The Chiefs, Josh Simmons, we don't know if he's immediately going to be an impact player. He's coming off the injury. How soon will he play? Jalen Moore, how good is he going to be after being a backup to Trent Williams during his time with the 49ers? Rashee Rice, coming off that ACL injury. Will he get suspended? How early will he play in the season? Will Xavier Worthy take the next step? What does Travis Kelce look at this point in his career? Will the defensive tackles they drafted fill in the defensive tackle production that left in free agency? So I think there are some questions with the Chiefs, but I agree. Still a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, they have the coordinators to get the job done. So the only reason I have them at 4 rather than 3, 2, or 1 is just there are some of those, I'd say, bigger question marks compared to the top 3.
I don't want Mahomes to get injured, but I am kind of curious what this Chiefs team does look like without him for an extended period of time. Because we saw Carson Wentz fill in a little bit when Mahomes had his signature end-of-season ankle injury, which may or may not have actually happened. But he goes on his Mormon mission for a month in September. What is Kansas City going to look like? That would greatly change how I feel about that. If they soldier through and are 3-1, I might bump them up a few spots and say, yeah, this roster is really good, and they get Mahomes on top of that. If they go 0-4, it's going to confirm a lot of stuff and thinking like, yeah, they're getting hard carried by the best quarterback in football. Anyway, moving on to 3-2. I've got the Ravens at 3 and the Bills at 2. Where do you have those two teams, Tristan?
I have the Bills at 3 and the Ravens at 2.
Let's talk about the Ravens first. I think they got better this offseason. They've only really lost Patrick McCarry and now Justin Tucker, a real tragedy with that one. Added Malachi Starks, added Jeffrey Epstein, and added the ghost of DeAndre Hopkins. Diop is not going to be that big of an addition in my opinion. They've already got Flowers, likely. Bateman just took a step forward. Andrews is still in the roster. There's only so many targets to go around when you are a run-first team with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. So the Hopkins addition, questionable. Starks should be good day one if he just kind of gets to sit back and ball hawk. I don't know if the Ravens will let him truly do that. And Green, good player. There's some questions if he's going to translate immediately to the NFL given the level of competition faced. Have to wait and see, and that should improve their pass rush a little bit. I view the Bills and Ravens as virtually even with each other going into the offseason. It's me being generous to the Ravens, really, considering they lost the Bills in the playoffs. But I view them as equals. I think the Bills had a slightly better offseason. The Ravens may have had a little bit better of a draft, but I think the Bills just did a tiny bit more to give them that edge at 2 over the Ravens for me.
I can see why someone would have the Bills above the Ravens. I'm more partial to the Ravens because I do think when we look at their matchup in the playoffs last year, although the Bills did win that game, I think the Ravens were clearly the better team throughout. They just made the more back-breaking mistakes, but they averaged over 6 yards a carry. They moved the ball up and down the field, and then they had those back-breaking mistakes, which is the reason they lost.
I mean, the back-breaking mistakes are part of the overall process, though. You can't just hand-wave those and say, oh, outside of that, the Ravens were the better team. Yeah, I could have said, oh, well, outside of the Ravens running for 6 yards a carry on, the Bills were the better team than Baltimore. I think trying to minimize those doesn't do it justice, particularly when the Ravens have a habit of turning the ball over in the playoffs in these big moments. It's part of who they are.
I just think the quality of what they have on their team is better than what the Bills have, and I disagree a little bit. I think the Ravens, because of their draft, have had the better offseason. I agree that if you think DeAndre Hopkins is come in and be an immediate game changer on offense, that's probably not going to happen. He is just someone who raises their floor slightly, brings a veteran presence to that wide receiver room, gives gives them more depth in that wide receiver room. Rashad Bateman did take a step. They have plenty of talent on that offense to move the ball up and down the field. We saw Derrick Henry's age should not be a question mark last year. And then on defense, when you get the best safety in the draft in Malachi Starks, which will allow Kyle Hamilton to play more of that strong safety in the box type of role consistently, and have Malachi Starks be the free safety, and you get a top 16 talent in Mike Green, who led college football in sacks last year, and you got him in the second round to add to that Ravens pass rush. I think they took a major step forward, did not lose a lot, and I think they're going to be the second best team in the NFL.
I think you are immediately equating what Mike Green did in college to the NFL. I would be shocked if he cracked 9 sacks. I really would. And he does not have that much utility in the run game, in my opinion, which is kind of how the Bills wore him down with James Cook and with Josh Allen on the ground, as opposed to just sitting back in the pocket and dissecting them. So head-to-head matchup, again, I think it's the Bills. But let's talk about Buffalo a little bit, because they did have a few losses in free agency. They lost to Mark Cooper. They lost Von Miller. But they bring in Josh Palmer, and they bring in Joey Bosa to replace those guys. Those feel like lateral moves to me. Nothing really lost, nothing really gained. Retained Milano, drafted Maxwell Harrison, freakish athlete, can be that cornerback 2, cornerback 1 guy on the outside. Got TJ Sanders. I think he could have been a first-round talent. Phenomenal pass rusher on the inside. Got Landon Jackson. Elite run defender at that 4-eye edge, 3-4 defensive end type position. And they got Deontay Walker out of Kentucky, who's not just a big-bodied bruiser who's going to be able to slow down opposing teams' run game. So I think they had a great draft. They boosted their defense a whole lot. I don't think they got worse than the area, and I think they had the best offense in football from a scoring standpoint in 2024. They scored more points than everybody else in the league, playoffs included. So I have a hard time putting them any lower than 2, but if you want to justify the Ravens, fine. I can see the thought process, but for me, it's still the Bills. It's still Josh Allen over Lamar.
I explained why I think the Ravens, I'd give them the slight edge heading into the season over the Bills, but the reason I have the Bills at 3 compared to the Chiefs being at 4, where in the past I've had the Chiefs ranked higher than the Bills, is that the Bills addressed perfectly their needs through the draft. Where were they weak, and the reason they fell in the playoffs? They did not have a corner 2 after theirs got injured in the playoffs, and they could not guard the Chiefs receivers. They addressed that perfectly by adding Maxwell Harrison, who has elite athletic upside. And then they struggled against the run, against the Ravens, against the Chiefs a little bit, who used the run game to control the clock. And what did they do? They drafted TJ Sanders, who has pass rush upside, as you mentioned, defensive tackle on the interior. They drafted Landon Jackson, who is 6'6", 270 pounds, has pass rush athletic upside, and is very good against the run. And you mentioned Deontay Walker. Deontay Walker from Kentucky, right?
Yes.
Who has upside there. So the areas where they were weak and was the reason they struggled in the playoffs, they made improvements in those areas. So that's why they're a top 3 team for me, and why I gave them the edge over the Chiefs.
You want to talk about why they lost in the playoffs and improving that. They now have digital spotting of the first down marker as well, football. So that will probably be it's a year too late. It's always a year too late for the Buffalo Bills. People like crying about how, the league keeps changing the rules for the Bills' sake. It never really benefits the Bills. Like, the Bills get screwed and then the league changes the rules after they get screwed. But jokes about the spot in the playoff game aside.
The other thing I want to say about the Bills is I don't get why people were so shocked that they didn't address the wide receiver room, because they were very productive last year. Khalil Shakir, clearly a very good receiver. Keon Coleman, he kind of progressed as the season went on. They have 2 good tight ends. They have a bunch of good running backs that also offer pass catching upside. So I don't really get that criticism of their draft.
I understand. I don't agree with it, because the thought process is, okay, we didn't really have anyone take over the passing game against the Chiefs in the playoffs. We kind of had to scheme guys open in that setting, which is a fair assessment. They don't have a game-breaking guy. They don't have a truly elite tight end. They don't have one of the 5 or 6 best wide receivers. And it would be really nice to have one of those guys to pair with Josh Allen like he had with Stephon Diggs, although Diggs fell off a cliff in the playoffs, seemingly. But it's just really not possible to go out there and get that guy picking at, 29, 30? That guy's not on the board. Well, who am I kidding? That guy might be on the board, but you're probably not going to find him. So why not take a swing at improving your defense rather than reaching on a wide receiver? Speaking of reaching on wide receiver, for my honorable mentions, I got 2 of them. One is the Green Bay Packers. I don't like Matthew Golden all that much. I don't think that was a great pick. I think their defense got a little bit worse in the offseason. I think they overpaid for Aaron Banks. but still going to have a very good running game. Jordan Love is still a top 12 quarterback. Still a very well-coached team, still very deep defensively. Had a top 5 defensive EPA in 2024, which shocked me a little bit when I looked it up. Packers are going to be good again. May not make the playoffs because of how good the NFC North is, but they definitely deserve being an honorable mention.
Well, they've been a back-to-back 7 seed. Previous years wouldn't be in the playoffs, but we know the talent the Packers have. Will they take the next step, I think, is the bigger question there.
And now, my final honorable mention, as promised, the Dallas Cowboys. And they are just on the outside looking in. If you will pay attention, of the top 12 teams I've named, including these two cats, all but 3 are from the NFC. That is clearly the better conference. But the Cowboys, adding George Pickens really does move them up for me because it makes their running game better. It draws some attention away from Jaden Blue and Javonte Williams. It gives defenses a lot more of a need to hone in on that. It gives CeeDee Lamb a little bit more space where he's not going to be bracketed every single time. And Dak Prescott, when he's healthy, when he's on the field in a pocket of somewhat cleanliness, is a top 10 quarterback. So I think their offense is going to be awesome. I think their pass rush is still going to be elite. And if you score a ton of points, that minimizes how bad your run defense is because teams are going to have to try and pass their way back into games against you to keep up. So getting Pickens boost everything on their roster. The only issue is long-term stuff. You're going to have to pay him and Micah Parsons $70 million next offseason, which they don't have. Probably going to have to restructure Dak and kick that can down the road. But for the short term, that is a great move. It helps out every area of weakness they had.
Yeah, their draft was great. They got Tyler Booker, who some people didn't like, but immediately steps in and fills that massive hole left by Zach Martin. He probably won't be that good immediately, but a player that has a lot of upside and can be a quality starter in the NFL. And when you look at the Cowboys and how they develop offensive line, you just got to trust who they pick. And then there are 2 picks immediately after that. Players that were talked about being potential late first-round picks in Revel and Donovan Ezeraku. So they improved their defense, improved that offensive line, and George Pickens is a great football fit because he can be that quality high-end wide receiver on the outside that you can take deep shots to, where you run then the majority of your offense through CeeDee Lamb, where he has less attention on him from the defense. So I think the football fit is perfect. Will the personality fit between George Pickens, Micah Parsons, and some of those other personalities in the locker room work? That's
it's
yet to be
warm
determined.
In Dallas. It is easier to be happy in Dallas. It's easy to be miserable in Pittsburgh, raining all the time, cold. You're there in October, November, December. You're not happy. It's easy to be happy in sunny Dallas.
First-time head coach, also a question mark.
Who cares? Anyway, number 1, we've got the Eagles. And what, do we both have them? You had them at 2 after the free agency, right?
The Eagles? No, we had the Eagles both at 1.
We both had the Eagles at 1. Yeah, nothing has changed. And yeah, they lose Montez Sweat. They lose Milton Williams, Slay, Becton, Rodgers. They lose some pieces. Big deal. It happens to Super Bowl champion. They reloaded exceptionally well. Jahad Campbell, great linebacker, greatly strengthens that front 7, has pass rush upside from way downtown, and can be pretty effective in coverage. Will be awesome beside Zach Bond. Adoree Jackson, probably as good as Isaiah Rodgers, comparable fill-in piece. Andrew Makuba out of Texas, one of the bigger steals of the draft. Fell a little bit because of positional value. Greatly helps out the secondary. And Ty Robinson out of Nebraska. If you watch the Colorado game, you know how much of a monster that guy is. He can ruin an offensive line today. Big physical brute on the inside. Yet another rotational piece for a defensive line to replace Williams. Great draft. Absolutely flogged the Chiefs, who are the AFC's representative in the Super Bowl, and I can't honestly see them being much worse. The only thing which can slow them down is injuries, and A.J. Brown absolutely spazzing out. The Eagles are still number 1.
They lost Kellen Moore to the Saints.
Ooh.
The Eagles...
I could play call for the Eagles. It's not that hard.
We could drone on about all the offensive talent they have, all the defensive talent. The only real question mark you maybe have is the depth along the defensive line is not quite what it was when they just won the Super Bowl, but the overall talent is immense. I mean, you mentioned some of the pieces they lost, but then immediately they get Jahad Campbell after having Zach Bond be the best interior linebacker in football, and you add Jahad to that mix, who's excellent in man coverage, is a great off-ball blitzing linebacker. In college, was recruited as an edge rusher, so maybe he offers you some upside there. So just adding him to that talented defense, and then you get Makuba, who you're able to put in at safety. Cooper DeJean, he doesn't maybe have to play free safety really. You can slide more in at corner because you just drafted Makuba, who led the SEC in interceptions. So I think the defensive pieces they add in the draft were excellent picks for them, and it allows them to keep players in their specific positions.
I'll say the O-line may be a tiny bit worse. I think Becton is not talked about enough in terms of how great of a right guard he was. But if there ever were to be a team which can fill in through late round draft picks or free agent signings for seemingly low value and immediately have them come in and be high-level starters, it's the Eagles. It's a great organization, great coaching staff, great team. While I may bash the Bengals for drafting a Shamar Stewart because they are not great at developing talent, if the Eagles had drafted him instead of Giad Campbell late in the first, I would have said, boom, slam dunk pick. In 2 years, you're going to have another Nolan Smith on the outside, being a double-digit sack threat with the athletic upside. So when you're a great team, you get a bit longer of a leash.
That has been our top 10 teams after the NFL draft. Let us know your exact 10 down in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next week.